Hello, everyone. My name is Roderick.
And I'm Arthur.
And we're here to talk about a new working model for ops teams in a DevOps environment. But before we go into the new model, let's cover the current model. We're going to ask a couple diagnosis-type questions. So do you have developers lined up at your desk asking for help before you've had your morning coffee? Or do you find yourself multitasking or constantly being interrupted throughout the day with unplanned tasks? Or do you have a hard time keeping up with your Slack messages or have an inbox filled with unread emails and it prevents you from actually focusing on the work at hand? If so, you may have a case of what we call DevOps interruptitis. And you're not alone. At Capital One, where Arthur and I both work, our ops team faces this problem every day. We work in a very collaborative environment. So our ops team sits very close to the development teams, and it's an open space. And so devs are able to walk up to anyone on the ops team and say, hey, I'm having this issue. Whether it's a Jenkins job that's failed or Docker, they're trying to deploy something with Docker or use a new AWS service, they have questions and they need answers. And so while it seems harmless for someone to walk up and tap you on the shoulder, it's very disruptive. And if you have enough of those throughout the day, you feel exhausted. And then you go home feeling like, what did I do today? Like, what did I accomplish? And so it's never good to have that feeling. And while there's no cure for DevOps interruptitis, we should at least consider treatment, right? There will always be interruptions, but we want to try to reduce those interruptions as much as possible. And so we should try to find ways to subside the symptoms. We could start by trying to hide behind our computers or go into a room and get away. But we work in a very collaborative environment, and so that's not really possible. We could also try to create a maze, put a maze between your ops team and the developers, right? And we've seen this happen where we create these intake processes or require devs to have a Jira ticket before we can even talk to them. So if you don't have a ticket, sorry, I'm not going to talk to you. And that's not what we're trying to achieve. This is another way of building a wall between your ops team and your devs. And so we're trying to destroy those walls and create a more collaborative environment. We could also just bury our heads under our computers and say, hey, this is just the way life is, right? This interruption, just have to deal with it, suffer through it. But, we want to continually improve. We want to find ways to do things better. And so at Capital One, we think we've found a model that has started to work for us. But before we go into that, let's take a quick detour and talk about the concept of deep work.
So, before we talk about deep work, let's take a look at what does a typical office environment look like today. And if you look at a typical office worker, they go only 11 minutes between interruptions. And we know from lots of research that it takes about 25 minutes, maybe more, to get back into the task that you were working on prior, right? And as Dave O'Connor said in the Google SRE book, if we want people to be happy and productive, viewing engineers as interruptible units of work where the context switch is free, and we know it's not, right? It's at least 25 minutes every time we switch. is not optimal, right? It leads to unhappiness. In Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, which we titled the presentation after, he defines the term deep work as professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive abilities to the limit, right? And in that deep state, the efforts that you have create new value, improve your skills, and those things that you create are really hard to replicate. On the flip side, what we've been talking about with DevOps interruptitis is shallow work. And shallow work, as Cal Newport put it, is not cognitively demanding, logistical style tasks often performed while distracted. These efforts tend to not create much new value in the world, and are fairly easy to replicate, right? So deep work itself is becoming increasingly more rare in our interrupt-driven world, right? And especially in our roles as DevOps practitioners, but also devs and ops and other roles, it's very interrupt-driven. But at the same time, as something like deep work is becoming increasingly more valuable because, right, we've been talking about it all this conference, all our systems are getting more complicated, the distributed nature, the complexity of systems just keeps going up. We really need that ability to concentrate the deep work to absorb these systems and to improve them, right? So people who are able to harness and cultivate this skill of deep work will thrive in this new economy. And we've all felt this deep work at one point or another, right? And you might know of it by another term that's common in the tech industry, flow. And when we've been in flow, code streams from our hands and problems get knocked over and you think you might even be able to take on a Jedi, right? Like that's how, it feels great to be in that state, but we feel it so infrequently. And Cal Newport basically summed it up pretty well. A deep life is a good life. So hopefully I've convinced you, you feel, yeah, this would be great, like but how do I do it, right? How can I possibly experience more deep work in my current work environment? Well, at Capital One, we thought the current environment is kind of like this, kind of like having an operation without any anesthetics and getting a really bad headache. And we thought there must be a better way. Let's try a newer, a more modern approach to structuring our DevOps teams. And so the thing that we did was we split the team in two. We took, with each team kind of specializing in a different activity. And the first part of the team, which we like to call the foreground part of the team, that part accepts all the inputs, they field the requests, they fight fires, they come in that day and they know they're not going to be making meaningful progress on the project they're working on, but that's their role for that time period while they're on foreground. And it's very similar to a triage nurse in a hospital where their role is to really take in those new patients, figure out how urgent is this, how not urgent is it, and fix it, right? And kind of redirect to where it needs to be. And you probably heard the term foreground and you saw our animation earlier. We basically got inspired by the Unix FG command where you foreground a process and at that point it can accept user input and it's amenable to be interrupted by users. The other part of the team, as you can probably guess, is the background part of the team. And the background part is really the part of the team that's focused on making meaningful progress on strategic projects, on building tools, on improving existing tools, finding new tools, and kind of building up that platform for developers to be empowered themselves. And again, as you can guess, that's analogous to the BG command in Unix, where you background the process, and that process works without easy user interruption, right? You can still send it a kill You can still send it a kill command, but hopefully don't do that, please, to me. But it has the CPU to itself, and it can make meaningful progress, right? So you might be thinking, okay, well, what would this actually look like on my team, right? And this is just an example of the roles and responsibility breakdown that we're doing with our team at Capital One. And again, for your team and your processes, it's going to be different, right? And you're going to want to tailor to your use cases. But for us, really, the person that's on foreground, they're there to have the request intake, right? They're speaking to the developers, they're speaking to the stakeholders. Whereas the person on background, they're working on those strategic tools. The person on foreground is going to be firefighting, and they're going to be on call, right? This kind of goes into that on-call rotation and the discussion around having sustainable on-call practices. Whereas the person on background is automating away those fires, right? Let's not have fires in the first place. Let's automate those manual processes that cause incidents. And again, the foreground person's role is to still be there to answer questions, to still, we don't want to tell people to just go away, right? We want to help them, we want to move things forward, but we want to be the person that's kind of blocking the background team and letting them get their work done, letting them build those new tools, those platforms to empower people and devs and teams to own their own destiny. And of course, it wouldn't be sustainable if you were on foreground forever, right? So you want to rotate on a regular basis, right? And at Capital One, our rotation is about a week. It is a week, actually. And depending on the size of your team, like for us, you can be fortunate enough to be on foreground for only a week and on background for 2 weeks straight, right? So it depends on how you structure it.
All right, so this all sounds great. So what author just explained, foreground, background, how do you actually get started? And as an ops person, you're probably super excited, right? You now have this time that you can actually focus and be in background mode and just, stream lines of code from your hands, right? But your devs are probably not as excited, right? Because this does require them to change their behavior. So they may be accustomed to always going to their favorite ops engineer for help. And we know how changing developers' behavior is difficult, right? We tell them, don't break the build, but they still break the build anyway. So, this requires them to kind of change their behavior, right? So now we're saying, instead of going to this particular person that your favorite ops person, you now have to kind of talk to this other person that's on foreground. And how do you do this? How do you actually convince developers that this is the way to go? Well, first, we got to start communicating. Communicate a lot, right? Over-communicate. Explain the idea behind wanting to be able to have time to focus on things, focus on tasks, and build tools and work on those projects that will actually provide meaningful business usage. You also want to leverage some of the quotes that author just mentioned, research that author just mentioned. So being able to kind of look at some of the research that's been done around deep work and how it can actually improve your productivity. And use that as a tool to kind of have that conversation with your developers. You also want to sell it as an experiment. So don't go in saying, this is, we're going to do this forever. Try it out. Try it out as an experiment. Time box it. Maybe start with a month or a quarter and see how it goes. And the key here is to continually to iterate and continually to try to improve the process and work through that new model. The other thing is, when we first started doing the foreground background, we had situations where the foreground person wasn't always able to answer the question. And so someone on background may have to kind of step in occasionally to help the foreground person resolve some issues with the developers. And this is a good thing, right? This is what we want. We want to share knowledge within the team. So we don't want one particular ops engineer to have all the knowledge. We want to actually spread that within the team. And so having this model allows you to kind of share information among your teammates. And the other thing is developers, like, they want fewer issues as well. They want fewer fire drills and things failing. And so this allows the team to actually, build those tools that will help them be more efficient. And so tell them, hey, help us help you, right? We're doing this to try to help you so that we can actually do things in a way that's a lot more efficient. And the other thing is keep devs in a loop. So as you're working through this new model, there will be changes. You'll probably iterate. You may make some adjustments. You want to continue to communicate that with your developers and get their feedback. So if certain things aren't working, kind of have that conversation, bring that up, be transparent, so everyone can kind of benefit from that discussion. The other important piece here is visualization, right? So it's great to have a model, but it's useless if no one actually follows it. And so you got to kind of have to have those visual cues that will remind developers, hey, this is who's on foreground this week, this is who's on background. And so for at Capital One, we initially started with stickies. So we put a sticky on the monitor to indicate who's on foreground and who's on background. So the green sticky indicates that developer was on foreground, and the red sticky indicates they're on background. At some point, the stickies just didn't stick. And so we tossed them in the trash, and we took a slightly different approach. And so this is kind of how we're iterating and improving the process. This is when we introduced or found Lexafor. So Lexafor is a device that you plug into your computer, and you can change the color of the status to indicate, am I on background or am I on foreground? And so this is a way to do this in real time. So if I'm on foreground, I may be green, but I may get a fire, or I may have to deal with a urgent issue or something, a fire drill, and I may need to change my light to red so that I can focus on getting that, or on clearing out that fire. And so this is a way for, if another developer is walking up and has an issue, they can see that, hey, I'm busy, I'll come back on green in, say, an hour or two. So this is our way of iterating through kind of the improving upon what we started off with the stickies. So this is great for kind of walk-ups. But we also have Slack, right? And people often ping us through Slack channel. And so we have these, using the new Slack status indicators, we also indicate who's on foreground and who's on background. You can also get very creative and change these icons. We try to stick to red, green to indicate background, foreground, but you can change your colors and customize it to your needs. We also have a Slack channel where devs can kind of talk to folks on the ops team, and we set a topic at the top of the Slack header to indicate who's on foreground. And in the future, we actually want to introduce a chatbot, right? The goal of the chatbot would be to basically intercept a request from the dev if they try to ping someone who's on background. And so it'll politely say, I'm sorry, dev, Roderick is on background today. Please talk to X person because they're on foreground. So just a nice way to kind of redirect the devs from, kind of bothering someone that's actually on background.
So, how do you keep it going, and how do you make sure that this experiment and this new model will be successful? Well, like with hand washing at hospitals, it's all about repetition. It's all about reminders. You want to keep reiterating to the devs that walk up that, hey, no, I'm on background right now. Please go talk to this other person. And sometimes you have to be firm, right? Like visualizations like the Luxifor help, as Roderick was mentioning, but ultimately it comes down to you sometimes being a jerk and saying, no, not right now. And expect failure, right? It's gonna, especially the first month, the first couple of months, and even now, several months in, we're still iterating and we're still in our growing pains. You're gonna expect failure, but you can always jolt it back and keep iterating and keep improving, right? So don't give up, basically, like this person did. And sometimes you need to work from home, right? Like you really want to concentrate on something and people are still walking up. So take the time to work from home, stay focused, unlike in the oatmeal. But at those points when you disconnect and you're just not visible in the office, that helps as well. And we found that as a good, not last resort, but a good way to kind of make sure that your background time is very much one that's full of deep work. So you've seen kind of how would you sell this to your organization? How would you sell this to your teams? How do you visualize it? And how do you keep it going? So what are the takeaways? Well, we live in an ops life, right? And in just a general office environment, it's very interrupt driven, and specifically in our roles, it's even more so. But deep work is worth it. It's really something that's empowering, that's fulfilling, and that really lets you make that meaningful progress that I think we all crave. So keep it going, don't give up, keep iterating, and hopefully we can, while DevOps interruptitis has no cure, we can treat it with these new processes.
So if any of this sounds interesting or exciting to you, where you like to work in an environment where you can actually experiment or work on or use latest open tools, software, or even build a tool and open source it, Capital One is hiring. We're looking for software engineers to help us build really great products and services for our customers.
And DevOps, QA, every role.
And with that, my name is Roderick Randolph. I lead the DevOps engineering practice for Capital One. Thank you so much for allowing me to present. It's been a pleasure. Please connect with me on LinkedIn, and these slides will also be available online.
And I'm Arthur Maltson. I also work at Capital One, which is unfortunate for Roderick, but good for me. And the slides will also be available on my slide deck, and I'll tweet it out once the slides are up. So please feel free to follow me. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well done, gentlemen.
Do we have any questions? And by the way, if you ask questions, we have the Luxifors to give away. So you can come up and
four questions.
Oh, all the hands came up. Oops. Uh-oh. I think you quit the presentation.
Can you explain how many people you have on their team and how many are on foreground and how many are on background at one time?
So our team currently has 6 people. So we set aside 2 people to be on foreground for a given week, and then the rest of the team is on background. So we're able to kind of rotate within the team. So every 3 weeks you're on foreground, and the rest of the time you're actually on background.
Yeah, and then one of those people that's on foreground would be on call, with the second person being the secondary.
All right,
I would
question over
toss
here.
it, but just afterwards.
Yeah, we don't want to gouge any eyes.
I just wanted to ask, when you guys decided to do that separation, what type of growing pains did you go through initially?
Growing pains?
Yeah.
Basically, people still walking up, tapping you and saying, hey, I need this help. And in our case, we had DevOps, like one DevOps person kind of aligned with a specific project. So that kind of was a natural person that you'd go to. And we're still working through trying to make the projects more everybody can answer those questions on the team. So we're definitely still growing through that.
Yeah.
How did you handle proximity? So would you have a cluster of people in red section or in green section, or were they scattered throughout the office?
So you're referring to the ops team itself?
Yeah.
So our ops team is actually centralized in one area, but the devs are like literally
So
nearby.
I see you've got in that picture there's a guy on green right against the window. Didn't you
right
find
there.
that the other guys who were red were being disrupted just because of the background noise?
That's a good point. I mean, sometimes what ends up happening is the person who's asking the question, somebody who's on background knows the answer and they'll pipe in. But again, this goes back to iterating and trying to stop yourself also from jumping in and helping. But that's definitely still a growing pain.
All right, we'll do one last question over here.
How long did it take for people to accept that your developers are not being jerks and just trying to get stuff done?
Still working on it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
we like to assume positive intent. So we're assuming that they're asking questions because they actually want to get stuff done or they actually want to learn about a certain topic. And so we kind of assume that they have positive intent behind their requests.
Okay, so for everybody who asked a question, please come up. We have the Luxifors, but we also have, oh, come on, a whole bunch of them. Why is it not? Phil.
You get one.
There we go.
You
We
get
have a
one,
whole bunch
you
of
get
them
one. Everyone
at the
gets
Capital One booth. We don't have. We have a couple hundred. So
Yeah.
please come up and get one. So thank you.